Good morning. We read Judges 11 and 12 today, and as we finished up yesterday on chapter 10, verse 12, it says, the Amorites were called to arms and they encamped in Gilead. The Israelites came together. There's going to be a battle, and the people of Israel haven't been following God, and they've cried out to God. But the commander of the people of Gilead says, who is going to lead our army? Who's going to, and whoever leads our army will be the head of all of Gilead, over all of the inhabitants of Gilead. And then chapter 11, we start the story of Jephthah. And it says that Jephthah, the Gileadite, son of Gileadite, the son of a prostitute, strike against him, was a mighty warrior. And then again it says Gilead was the father of Jephthah. And then the kicker, Gilead's wife bore him sons. And these sons were jealous of Jephthah, and they said, you will have no part of our father's inheritance, because you're not a legitimate child. And, we know that, this, the illegitimacy and legitimacy of children, it's still a subject today, of so many different things. But so the sons of Gilead expel Jephthah from their community, and Jephthah goes and he lives off in the hills of a region not so far away, the land of Tob, and the outlaws gather to him, and he becomes the leader of a band of outlaws, and then at this time, it's the Amorites are coming. There's going to be a battle, and the people say, who can lead us? And then, hey, Jephthah is a mighty warrior. He's got a band of outlaws. They know how to fight. They know what's going on, and so let's get this guy to come back. So they send messengers to Jephthah, and he says, you kicked me out of home. You said you don't want me. You said I'm not worthy of your being in your presence, and now you need help. You come to me. And how often has that happened to you? Somebody you think is your friend, all of a sudden distances themselves from you. And then at some point in time later, it's just kind of like, oh, they're your best friend, and they need you, and all of these things, they come back, and we've all had that rejection by someone, and then, their need comes up where maybe they come to their senses. Who knows what it is? But we know the feeling of Jephthah. And Jephthah says, if I come back, and if I am successful in this battle, you will make me commander of all your people. He says, I'm going to be the judge, the king, basically, more or less. And they agree to that because they don't know what else to do, and they need someone to lead them. And in many ways, I think, in the backs of their minds, it's, well, we can use him for a while, and, maybe he'll die in battle, and we won't have to put up with it, whatever. But, that's all just kind of reading between the lines. But, so then the next thing that happens after Jephthah has been put in command of everything, starting, verse 12 to 28 or so, he tries diplomacy. Diplomacy, we haven't heard too much of that, in the Bible. It's war, it's conquest. And there's been some, let us pass peaceably through. And Jephthah, brings those points up here later on, because these Ammonites are coming back wanting their land. And we can see in verse 26 that the Israelites had this land for 300 years. And all of a sudden now these guys are coming back and saying, this is our land, we want it back, But part of Jephthah's diplomacy is that, God has given us this land. God has restored this land to us, and we've had it all of this time. And he talks about how the Israelites, as they wandered, had asked, about going through this land or that land, and how they'd been refused, and then because of that refusal, God had given this land over. Verse 21, then the Lord, the God of Israel, gave Shiloh and all his peoples into the hands of Israel, and they defeated them and occupied the land. So Jephthah is using diplomacy. He's saying, this is what God has done, for his chosen people. and it's happened a long time ago. So if you just accept what God has done here, if you, rather than to, try to undo God's plans, let's make peace. And of course, they don't want to do that. Verse 28, the end of this trial at diplomacy. But the king of the Ammonites did not heed the message that Jephthah sent him. And then it says, the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh, and he made a vow to the Lord. And how many of us have ever done that? God, if you, maybe, that's not such a, well, he does. He says, if you will give me the Ammonites into my hand, and whomever comes out of the doors of my house, I will, whoever comes out to the door of my house to meet me when I return victorious shall be the Lord's. And I kind of wonder if rather than whoever, it was more the whatever, because he was, thinking that, a dog or, something like that would be coming out to greet him when he came home. But he goes off and he is successful in the battle and preserves Israel's hold on the land. And it's, verse 33, he inflicted a massive defeat on them, 20 towns as far as Abel-Keramim. And so the Amorites were subdued before the people of Israel. And then he comes home, and his daughter meets him, his only daughter, his only child. And he's made a vow to God. Jephthah, it says the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, but he must have known God before that, because I just assumed that. It seems to me that in so many ways, even though he was, kicked out of his house and he was a leader of a band of outlaws, it just feels to me that Jephthah must have known God previous to that. And he comes and he says, alas, my daughter. He's deep with remorse, but yet he says, I made a vow to God. I will keep my vow to God. And this is what has to happen. And his daughter, says, if that's what must be, that's what must be. But give me 2 months to go and mourn that I am a virgin. I am not married. And she remains that. It isn't that she goes off and she spends 2 months in wild living, because, it says that at the end of the 2 months, she returned the father to her father, and she had never slept with a man. So she was mourning the reality that she had not been able to marry and to begin a family. And as I read this story every time, I just kind of, come on, let's be like with Abraham and Isaac. Come on, God, let's spare this girl's life. But it doesn't happen that way. And there's not, human sacrifice was not very often done. It was not a common practice at all, but it did happen occasionally, and it's a horribly sad thing. But it shows to us that he was indeed honorable in his vow to God, and he did what he said, and God in turn gave him favor. And they had crossed, and they had come home from this battle. And then the people of Ephraim, the soldiers of Ephraim, another Israelite nation, come and they say, well, why didn't you call us to go to war with you? Really? Why would they be upset because they hadn't been called to go to war? Well, because they hadn't probably been able to get some of the plunder. Others, the successful warriors probably came home with pockets full and bags full of plunder. But Ephraim and his Ephraimites are upset, and they go to battle against Jephthah and his men, and many of them are killed, and some of them hide and try to escape. And there was a word that they used. They would say, "Are you an Ephraimite?" And they would say, "No." And then would say, Shibboleth. And the Ephraimites couldn't pronounce that, or didn't pronounce it the same way. They would say Sibboleth without the H in there. And it's kind of like, saying either or either, or neither and neither. And, depending on where you're from and your English teacher, or, the different dialects of, I mean, you go down to New Orleans and they don't speak quite the same as we do here in North Dakota. Or you go where are you from with that accent? So they would know them by the way they spoke, by the way they would pronounce that word. And the Ephraimites fell, and the horrible thing is, 42,000 of the Ephraimites died then. It's just, what a ridiculous waste, what a ridiculous thing to happen because of jealousies or whatever the case may have been. And it said that Jephthah judged Israel for 6 years, and then he died. And then Ibzan came and judged Israel, who had 30 sons and 30 daughters, big family. He judged Israel 7 years, and then Elam judged Israel for 10 years. And after him, Abdon, the son of, judged, and he had 40 sons and grandsons. And so here we have again, now this time, all of these times with these people judging Israel, who were following in the footsteps of Jephthah and worshiping God. And, there was peace in the land, and the people followed God and knew God. And I think about, in my life, that, even in the midst of trouble and trial and turmoil, that God brings peace, God brings comfort. And it's just, I think about this whole portion of what we just read now with Jephthah and his rejection, with his promise to God and his sacrifice of his daughter, and how the peace comes that way. And when we're faithful, God is always faithful, whether we're faithful or not. So God is always faithful. And it's just an example of when people follow God, when the Israelites would hear God's word and know God and worship him instead of idols, that their lives were always so much better.